get Karyn to start, and then we'll welcome Karyn. She's going to maybe speaking a little bit about herself, and what's going to happen is she has some slides that she'll go through, and the floor is yours. I'm going to get your slides up. Thanks, Karyn.
Thank you, and hello everyone, depending on where you are on the globe. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It is always my honor and privilege to speak not only with my excellent co-speakers, co-workers today, but also to welcome all of you. Thank you out in the audience for being here. And thank you, of course, to Jenna for the invitation to speak. So what I'd like to do today is just to begin our time together with putting a human face on what we're doing. And I know within the compliance and regulatory scheme, many times you are working diligently with numbers and getting a chance to see what's happening on the banking side. And what I'd like to do as my background, which I'll tell you a little bit more about, is pull back the curtain a little bit and just to share with you why what you do is so, so very important. Because many times you may take an action in your private, I should say in your professional life, and you don't really know where that leads. So what I'd like to do today, based upon my experience as a federal prosecutor with the U.S. Department of Justice, is to show you what your actions can result in and how very, very important they are. So with that being said, thank you, Jenna, for that first slide. I'm going to give you a view from the front line, ladies and gentlemen. So let us begin. Next slide, please, Jenna. Okay, today I have for 10 minutes, I'm going to quickly give you a background of who I am and what my experience is. I'm going to share with you 2 case scenarios, which I hope will bring to you the real life importance of the work that you all do. And then finally, a conclusion. Next slide, please. Wonderful. All right. So I am very honored and privileged to hold the position as a federal prosecutor with the United States Department of Justice. For those of you who are perhaps not as familiar, it's a cabinet level agency that was established soon after the United States fought and won its independence from Great Britain. We are responsible for enforcing the laws of the United States federal government, our statutes, and we have over 110,000 employees. Head is the Attorney General of the United States. The Department of Justice is the FBI, federal agencies, and then my own, which are U.S. attorneys, assistant U.S. attorneys, and essentially we are prosecutors and lawyers enforcing the laws of the federal government. I myself have a background, I'm an attorney, background. I had the privilege of serving as a state-level prosecutor in the Manhattan DA's office in New York City, prosecuting violent crimes before I then became an assistant United States attorney on behalf of financial fraud cases. Thank you, Jenna. Next slide. He's no one famous, he's not going to be in the news, but he is the face, as I said, he is the real life face of what you do in your professions, how it impacts people in a positive way as well. I won't identify him specifically, but he is a federal agent with the U.S. Department of Justice's FBI. His first name is Chris, and I have utmost respect for Chris and the work he does and those such as, and other agents that help to enforce our laws. So keep an eye on Chris. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to come back to him later. And the photo you see there was him speaking at the time I was a resident legal advisor on behalf of the U.S. Embassy in Bangladesh. And he was talking with Bangladeshis and Americans about the importance of anti-money laundering and countering terrorist financing. All right, so we'll say goodbye to Chris for now, and we'll go to the next slide. Okay, so here's pulling back the curtain. And I want you to take a moment to look at this young man. His name is Mr. Amin. At the time this was taken, he's about 17. And I gather he probably looks like a lot of people you see every day. He looks like a good kid, right? He looks like he's just on the cusp of adulthood. At the time, he was an honors student in the state of Virginia. He had immigrated to the United States with his mother as a child from Sudan. And as I said, he was doing very academically, he was doing very well. And unfortunately, he came under the shadow of ISIS recruitment. So next slide, please. So Mr. Amin started a Twitter account. He had over 4,000 followers, over 7,000 tweets. And he provided instructions to his followers on how to use Bitcoin to mask the provision of funds to ISIL. He aided his friend, Riza, who was also in high school with him, to leave the country at that time, circa 2015, 2016, to join ISIS. For those of you not familiar, that during that time period, ISIS had self-proclaimed a caliphate and were asking like-minded individuals to come and join them. And Mr. Amin assisted his friend Riza to actually travel to the caliphate. So Ali is a very interesting portrait because again, he knew nothing about Bitcoin, he knew nothing about anti-money laundering. He wanted to just learn more about his religion. And unfortunately, as happens to many, he was led astray. So he goes from a 17-year-old honor kid to, let's go to the next slide, please, Jenna. Slide. She's been very good in helping me, and I'm very, very thankful. Let me tell you a little bit more about Mr. Amin. So Mr. Amin at that time began radicalizing in very distinct stages when we look back and saw what happened to him. I think that jumped too much. Yeah, thank you. You can jump all the way back. Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, right there. Thank you, Jenna. So as he began to first inquire more about his religion, which is normal for anyone who's exploring their faith, regardless of what it is, he unfortunately became connected with a group of radical ISIS supporters. And eventually, the 17-year-old honors student became someone who would post things such as this on his account. I can't imagine the reward it brings the jihad to Latin America. And it's this type of public affirmations that caught the attention, obviously, of not just the American, but other law enforcement officials. Next slide, please, Jenna. Okay, so eventually what happens is he is indicted, he's arrested, he's indicted, he goes to trial, and his defense is the dopamine defense. And I'm sure as you're all aware, dopamine is that chemical in our brain that is released when we are doing something enjoyable. And the defense on that was that ISIS targets the impulsiveness of teenagers. That may be true, I'm sure it is, and they also target others very specifically. But the defense was dopamine reinforces powerful stimuli, satisfaction, gratification, and in this case, identity. Mr. Amin was eventually sentenced to 11 years in jail by a federal court judge in the United States. His friend Riza, that we spoke about, who had actually gone to the theater of war, was actually reported to have died. He was 17 as well. But what's interesting here is that last word on that slide, identity. People who had spoken with Mr. Amin, who again was very young, 17, 18 at the time, we call it at times the loser to lion syndrome. Loser in the sense that he was just an average 17-year-old kid. There were reports his mother was very protective. He had medical issues. And all of a sudden, when he entered into this terrorist organization, he felt that he was now somebody, people would listen to him, and he felt empowered. So it was that loser to lion identity. And Mr. Amin is now sitting in a federal jail in the United States. But again, I mentioned this for our conversation today because of Bitcoin. This is someone who obviously was not a financier. He was not familiar with it, but he was using Bitcoin. And when this case came to trial, the government, the federal prosecutors, the assistant U.S. attorneys worked closely with your community, the AML compliance community, in order to get records and get other information. Thank you, Jenna. The second case now I want to talk to you about is a little bit closer, and it actually deals with Asia. And it's the Mohd bombing. This is Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, a magnificent city that I had the pleasure of living in for a number of years. As part of their push at the time, the ISIS had publicly announced that they were going to establish an Asian caliphate in Asia. And as those of you who are who are students of history, you know that whatever the empire that wishes to take control will always attack the power structure in any country, whether that's attacking the elite, attacking law enforcement, or taking away someone's language. Here they were going to attack the power structure, the rule of law, if you will, in Malaysia, and that was the leaders of the police and the leaders of the judiciary and others. And they were viewed as an obstacle they had to be getting rid of because, of course, they stood for the rule of law. Now, if you could go back one slide, please, Jenna. Now, what happened here was that at the time, there was a tweet that went out during Ramadan, which those of you are familiar, Ramadan is the holy month. And at that time, during the holy month, a tweet went out and advised all observant Muslims, do not go to any sporting centers or anything else. You should be observing your holiday. And it was a warning. It was a threat that if you did do so, that there would be actions taken. So here in Mohd, it was a bar, a bar restaurant in Kuala Lumpur. And there was a Euro football game happening at the time. And in the midst of the Euro football game, two men on a motorcycle drove past and they lobbed in a bomb. And now if you can go to the next slide, Jenna, this is what happened to people who simply wanted to watch football for the evening. Thankfully, these are quite graphic. These are public photos. I share them not for any shock value because they're horrid to look at, but just to show you the impact of hate and also how it's going to tie into the money laundering and terrorist financing. Thankfully, no one was killed. There was injuries, severe injuries to these unfortunate individuals, but no one was killed. So now that's the attack. And as we all know, ladies and gentlemen, nothing moves. What is the blood of any organization? It is the money, it is the currency. So I want to take you now to the money that actually led to funding of these horrific acts. So Jenna, thank you. So when the police came in, they did an excellent job, the Royal Malaysian Police. They learned that this was, the photo on the right-hand side that you're looking at is a representation, but it was a hand grenade that was lobbed into the restaurant bar of Mohd. So moving on. Now you have to, if you're gonna have hand grenades, who's gonna pay for this? Let's talk about Russell Salek for a moment. Now, if you take a look at this gentleman, he looks, at first blush, I would join you in saying, very happy fellow, right? He looks very normal, he looks very kind, he looks happy. He's a doctor. He's in fact an orthopedic surgeon. This is a highly educated, sophisticated man. And he has been described by his friends as easygoing and kind. And again, no more than Mr. Amin, do not be fooled by looks. It's not that terrorists have to look evil. This is the face of evil as well, ladies and gentlemen. So let's pull back the curtain on Dr. Russell Salek, who was operating at the time in Marawi, the Philippines, and was a respected member of the community. Next slide, please, Jenna. He, as well as Amin and others, had been drawn into the web of terrorist financing and using to reach his political goals of money laundering. That happy man that you saw on that other slide, he's communicating with an individual in New York in the United States, and he thinks he's talking to a fellow adherent of the terror campaign. But thankfully, he's talking to an undercover agent, but Salek doesn't know that. So as he's going back and forth in these communications, which he thinks are anonymous, which were not in the end, he says, it's not strict here. When he says here, ladies and gentlemen, he's talking about the Philippines. And again, this is about 4 years ago. This is not to say that the Philippines, what he's saying is correct. I'm not saying that, this is just his words. It's not strict here. Unlike in Australia or United Kingdom, or even liking Facebook status will put you in jail. But no worries here in the Philippines. They don't care about ISIS, LOL, only in the West. It would be a great pleasure if we can slaughter people. Let me stop there to just say that, do you see in his words, he knows that Australia and UK, Facebook, that the compliance, the regulatory scheme is very robust, but he's saying we don't have to worry about that in the Philippines. Well, he did have to worry about that in the Philippines, he was wrong. But this also, ladies and gentlemen, shows you that when we do have robust anti-money laundering, counterterrorism financing regimes, how very important it is, because that message does filter down to these people who want to commit murder. Thank you, Jenna. Next slide, please. So what happens to Mr. Salek? Well, Mr. Salick had been in touch with the undercover officer. He not only was going to fund an attack in New York City, but Mr. Salick, through wires, which were traced and entered into evidence, had given approximately $426.30 to the undercover officer, and that undercover officer then sent it on to an individual in Malaysia. And ladies and gentlemen, that $426 wire, that small amount of money, that money was then tied to the bombing for purchasing the weapons that blew up and caused all that carnage in Malaysia at the Mohd bombing. So again, when we're talking about terrorist financing and money laundering, it's a small movement of money, which I agree with you, it's hard to trace, but I just want you to see how important it is if a SAR is filed on that, or if something triggers on it, how important that is, because that is a thread in the tapestry that we can pull and then identify the Salicks. Right now, he's been obviously tried in the Philippines. He's awaiting extradition to the United States for his crimes here as well. Next slide, Jenna. So my conclusion, next slide. I want to take you back now to the face. Remember Chris, we talked about my colleague with the FBI, who I have great respect for. Here he is teaching in Asia, speaking to, there were compliance officers there, agents, prosecutors, judges, trying to share with them the message of how important what they do matters to people like Chris who are on the street. So this picture was taken in 2014. And Jenna, next slide. I'm going to take you to June 13th, 2015. This is a slide of a home in Staten Island, one of the 5 boroughs in New York City. And that picture in the left-hand side of that very happy-looking young man, his name is Mumuni. And he, like Amin and countless others, had been caught up in the web of the ISIS recruitment. And at the time, Chris, the FBI agent, along with others, were going to his house that you see there in the photo. He was being, they were executing a search warrant, which was authorized by a court of law, looking for, documents and other evidence that was tying Mr. Mumuni to radicalism, terrorist organizations. Now, I just want you to know, he looks very tiny in that picture, but in real life, Mr. Mumuni is 6 foot and about 250 pounds. I don't know what that is in kilos, forgive me, but he was a big boy. Chris, the FBI agent, comes in with his other agents. They come into the house, the mother greets them, and they said, we're here to do a search warrant. Is your son at home? And the son, I'll call him the son from now on, the son comes down these stairs, dressed in a robe, loose robe, and he goes to walk towards Chris and the other agents, and Chris asks him to please sit down on the couch. He's going to explain to him what's happening and what's going to happen. Well, instead of sitting on the couch, Mr. Mumuni pulls out, and the next slide, please, Jenna. Pulls out from underneath his robe a 9-inch knife and proceeds to stab Chris repeatedly with the knife. At that time, Chris he's a former US military officer. So when he went in to do the search warrant, he was wearing tactical SWAT gear. So thank God he had a protection. So the knife did not pierce into his body, but it did cut up his protective vest. And as they were fighting over the knives and the chaos that ensued, there was also an M4 long gun that the agents had with them, and the defendant, after he dropped the knife, because he wasn't, after he had stabbed a few times, he then tried to get his hands on the M4 long gun to shoot to death everyone who was in the house. Thankfully, he was not successful, and he was placed under arrest. He too was tried for material support of a terrorist organization. And this is my second to last slide for time-wise. And what was very telling, I think, is here at the very end, this was testimony in the United States, victims of crimes, and an agent can be a victim, as can anyone else. You're allowed to give a victim witness impact statement to the judge to tell them this impact it had on you. And again, remember that this individual, this Chris, is a former military officer. So he's quite familiar with the battlefield. And what he directly addressed the defendant and said, I never met you. I've never wronged you, yet you tried to kill me. This was not a battlefield. This was the city of New York, and you tried to kill me. So with that, I'll end my presentation But I do hope with the few moments I've had with you today, I was able to share with you how very, very important the work that you do is. It means a lot. It means more than you know. And even if you take an action or file a SAR and you never hear about it again and you don't know where it's gone into the world, do know that you have done some good. And what you do literally, literally can and does save lives. Thank you so very much for the opportunity to talk with you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Karyn. I think that was really insightful from a really real life perspective. And now we're going to move on to Robin. Thank you, Robin.
Well, thank you, Jenna. Let me just share my screen here. Let's go here. Okay, there we go. Okay, so thank you for having me, Jenna. Thank you for Ninja. Thank you to my esteemed fellow panelists, and thank you to everyone on the line for attending. It really is a pleasure to be here. My name is Robin Lee. I'm the VP of APAC for Napier Technologies. And what I thought I would do was an introduction to Napier. Number two, we're going to define what transaction monitoring is. And number three, we're going to talk about AI in transaction monitoring. Okay, so before I jump into Napier, just to give you a little bit of background, if anyone does have any questions that you can see what the kind of questions I can relate due to my background and what I've done. But I was born in this country here. I spent 10 years in this country here. I've been in Singapore now for about 10 years. And but my parents are from this country here. So for those of you wondering why I look like Jet Li and sound like Harry Potter, this is the reason why. Okay, I started my career in Silicon Valley. I was there for 6 years. I then transitioned to Wall Street, where for 4 years I was an analyst covering technology companies globally. Then got involved in the compliance space, launched a startup, so I can relate to many of the entrepreneurs on the line here, which subsequently was acquired by one of the law firms in Singapore. I then helped launch the RegTech space here in Asia with a company called Datarama. And then I was actually picked up by Refinitiv after, where I was a colleague of Andanta's, who'll be presenting later, where I was involved in running the strategy for the risk and compliance business out here in Southeast Asia. Okay, in terms of what I do now, author, so I've got a couple of publications, including the RegTech book, for which I was a contributor. I also teach a course called Technology Psychology, which is how to think like a tech company at these organizations here, including in KL as well, by the way. Well, obviously not now with COVID, but prior to that. Also involved in the InsurTech space, work with Karyn on the FinTech partnership, which we'll talk about later, as well as my current role at Napier. Okay, so let's tell you a little bit about Napier. The first question I always get asked is why Napier? John Napier, for those of you who aren't aware, was a 1500 Scottish mathematician. And this gentleman was famous for two things. Number one, he invented the logarithm. And number two, he didn't invent the decimal point, but he certainly, we certainly wouldn't be utilizing it the way we do today if it wasn't for the work that this gentleman did. So for those of you who hate math classes, you can blame this guy here. Company's about 5 years old. We're headquartered out of the UK, although we also have a presence in Europe and Asia. We're actually profitable as well, so I'd actually consider us more of a scale up than a startup. We haven't had to go to the market and raise money. We have just over 80 employees and about 200 customers globally. Okay, in terms of what we do, we offer a platform. So you can almost think of us like iOS, web or Android, where we have this platform, and on that platform, we have different apps. Okay, and here are the apps that are on offer. So transaction monitoring, which we'll be discussing later. We also do risk-based scorecards, client activity review. We do transaction or payment screening. So if you need to block a payment before it goes out, we can do that as well as client screening of that. We also have an AI app, and what the situation here, this platform is not only a software platform, it's a data platform as well. All these other apps to make them smarter, faster, and better overall. Okay, just in terms of us being an end-to-end solution here, we give you the ability to create rules, and I'll talk about that later down the line, but change them within the platform as well. We also permit unlimited users. It's deployable on cloud or on premise. So we work with both either way. And we have that customer success focus. So for those of you who aren't aware, I've got a definition of customer success here. I've got a little spiel on what a customer success manager is. But what's important here that I want to communicate, and I don't think that enough vendors in the region do, is this concept of a net promoter score. And so what I mean by that is we actually let our customers rate us, okay? And should we get 2 downticks in this rating that customers give us for 2 quarters in a row, we all get dinged on it, not just from a performance perspective, but financially as well. So we get paid on guys' happiness, basically, on customers' happiness. Okay, so let's talk about transaction monitoring. Okay, I've got a definition here. What I've highlighted in bold here, I think, is the important parts, right? The reviewing, analyzing, and administrating of transactions process on a business application information system. Okay, it's an IT and security process, and the other term is known as business transaction monitoring as well. And you can see all this on this Techopedia page here. Okay, a bit of background in transaction monitoring. Well, it really came into prominence post 9/11. The process has moved from humans to Excel to software. Okay, often case transaction monitoring was originally backward facing. However, this new concept of real-time transaction monitoring has come into play now, which is what we do at Napier. They were traditionally rules-based as well. That means, so when I say a rule, you might have a rule in your system to say that, I don't know, transactions over $10,000 need to get flagged. And so the transaction monitoring will flag all those transactions over $10,000. Simplest example, okay? Expanding scope and requirements. And it wasn't really a UI UX focus. It was more just a process rather than a solution or a product, okay? Typical challenges with this space include false positives. So these are transactions that get flagged as having some sort of risk associated with them, when there really isn't. Okay, an example is that over $10,000 transactions, but not all of them are risky, right? So often, so that will be those transactions will be an example of a false positive. False negative, I think the best example is one like what Karyn gave earlier, where let's say that I'm a terrorist and I don't know, Fred is a bomb maker. The cost of a bomb is relatively low these days. It's like $500, right? So for me to get that $500 past the transaction monitoring into the financial system and then onto Fred, it's not very difficult. And that's a transaction that should have gotten flagged, but didn't. And so that's what we call a false negative. Extensibility. So this example, so most solutions out there are not flexible. And that example I gave earlier about transactions over $10,000, let's say that we change that to $8,000. Often case, what you have to do with these traditional systems is you have to go back to the vendor. The vendor has to make the change of that rule itself. It takes like about a week, 2 weeks for that rule to get changed because there's hard coding involved. It could cost you as much as $10,000. So can you imagine you spend $10,000, make this rule change. Sometimes you get even more false positives. You have to spend another $10,000 to change it back, then another $10,000 to make that change again. This can get very expensive, right? Multiple solutions. So often case the vendor that makes the transaction monitoring versus the vendor that makes the case management system versus the vendor that makes the risk-based scorecards are all different. And so you have to pay for like systems integrators and data integrators to get all these things aligned. And so as a result, it can all get very expensive. But most importantly to us here at Napier, you're not there through the whole customer journey. So how are you expected to understand the customer if you're not making products for them through that whole journey? Okay, how we address those challenges. We have sandbox capability for you to test out those rule changes. Those rule changes are done within the UI and are so user-friendly, it's literally drag and drop. I haven't seen any other vendor in the market that offers this. We do AI, which we'll talk about in a second. Everything in our system is configuration, not coding. We have a single platform that you saw earlier. Everything is self-managed by you, the customer. So we empower compliance and financial crime teams and AML teams. And you're there through the whole customer journey. Okay, so let's talk about AI in transaction monitoring. So I've seen two approaches in the market, okay? And they both involve sticking a machine learning algorithm on something, okay? The first instance, you stick it on the analyst. You learn how the analyst behaves, what they do, what they're allowing to, what transactions they're permitting to go by, which ones they're discounting. And so the long-term goal here is to attempt to minimize the amount of time required by the analyst to do this stuff. Or there are firms that are brave enough to try and even get rid of the analyst altogether. Okay. The second approach that we see for AI in transaction monitoring is where the algorithm is sitting with the customer. And this is almost from a fraud perspective, where we take Jenna, we build a profile around her by seeing how often she transacts, who she transacts with, when she transacts. And so that way, by learning Jenna's behavior and her transactional behavior and how she operates, anything out of the ordinary that will get flagged and again will be brought to the attention of the analysts, to the analyst. Okay. So these are the two methodologies. Everyone in the market I've seen either does one or the other. At Napier, we have a chief AI officer. We also have ties to the University of Milan. And I believe that this will be the next stage of AI in transaction monitoring that the market will soon be starting to look at. And that is, we have another layer of AI that sits on top called activity-based learning. And basically we take both these methodologies, we do both, okay? And then we stick another AI algorithm on top of that. I call it AI squared because it's AI learning on AI. And so it makes it, as I mentioned in my earlier slide, it just supercharges our platform to make our transaction monitoring system even more efficient and eliminate more false positives and identify even more false negatives. So this, I think, is the next frontier. And again, I have not seen anyone else in the market doing it, but I can expect people to start seeing stuff like this and trying to do stuff like this as well. However, here's the kicker, ladies and gentlemen. AI in our industry has been marketed to death, okay? And it's predominantly from two sets of groups of individuals or organizations. The first are from the AI algorithm guys, where you have a Stanford computer science PhD in computer science, sorry, who will come up with an amazing AI algorithm, and but transaction online retail, it could be applied to supply chain. And so you're not really thinking about the customer if you go in from that approach. Steve Jobs always said, right, go start with the customer first and work backwards, like I said before. So, we don't really relate to that. The second approach are from the traditional rules-based guys, where you have to, type the code in, hard code the rule change. Because these guys, have such a limited rules-based system, what we see them end up doing is building the AI module on top and then upselling AI as a way of staying relevant. Okay. So, but what we found is if you have that flexible rules-based solution and you don't have the data, AI might not be the choice for you yet. And so what we say to our customers is, when it comes to AI, it really is crawl, walk, run. Get your rules house in order first, and then we can always talk about AI later down the line. Okay, so that's it from me. Thank you very much for your time. I will now hand the floor back to Jenna. Thank you again.
Thank you, Robin. So I think we have Nur Fazlim next.
Yeah, thank you, Jenna. Maybe you can share my slides. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. All right, thank you, Jenna. My name is Nur Fazlim binti M. Muhammad Kunju. I hold a Certified Compliance Officer certification from CAMCO, Asian Banking School. And I'm also a certified training professional from Financial Accreditation Agency under Bank Negara Malaysia. As for now, I'm heading the head of compliance for Axiata Digital Ecode Sdn Bhd, famously known as Boost. I've been in the financial industries for the last 12 years, specifically previously from remittance service providers and also money services business industries. Even it to be under categorized under Bank Negara regulations is under Sector 3. So Boost is categorized under Sector 4. So my instrumental core competency was actually to overturn non-compliance issues in the organizations. And in the past of 12 years of experience in this financial institution that I've been to, I've been seeing lots of cases that I've identified, and we have been escalating the cases as well to the Financial Intelligence Enforcement Departments of Bank Negara Malaysia on all the cases that been captured as considered as suspicious. Okay, so let us go to the first slide. Okay, why transaction monitoring is actually vital for a financial institution. Okay, so basically there will be three main areas that we will need to do in transaction monitoring. Number one is actually to have the detection mechanism, and number two, to have this post analysis to be conducted. And whilst having these two processes, we will be able to prevent the crime. We will be able to prevent financial crime into the institutions. Okay, so one of the main important criteria to do this transaction monitoring is actually to detect suspicious activities by the customers. And number two is to have the agility in risk-based approach mechanism on the customers, because basically transaction monitoring also allows financial institution to take a risk-based approach. So this means that we will be able to determine and manage the potential risk of the customers, and the number of factors goes into the determining the risk level of a customer, such as the type of the employment, country of residence, and etc. So once a financial institution has determined that the risk level of the customers, then we can adjust accordingly their monitoring to monitor the customer itself. For example, if the customer is categorized as a low risk customer, then we will not need to have a lot more of transaction monitoring as compared to the level of monitoring that we have to input on a high risk based customers. So depending on where they are based and which market segments and products they offer, some of the organization will need to apply a higher risk based approach to all these clients. Number three is actually to be able to previous slide is Jenna. Okay, so number three is actually to be able to stop the transactions that posing high risk towards the institution by virtue of real-time monitoring. So basically in this mechanism, if let's say for the process of when we are onboarding new customers to the institution, we will be conducting sanction screening program. So this is also part of the real-time processes that we will be conducting. In the event if we captured the customers is actually a true match under the sanction screening program, then we will be able to stop them from being entering into the organization and onboarding this type of customers. Number four, we'll be able to monitor the transaction that pose hazardous risks towards the institution by virtue of post-transaction monitoring. And in accord to the AML-CFT policy guideline issued by Bank Negara Malaysia, effective on 31st December 2019, so transaction monitoring is important, and we have to abide to this regulation in accord to the clause 9.1 and also clause 10.5. Can go to the next slide, Ms. Rajala? Okay. So under the clause of 9.1, enforcement action can be taken against the reporting institution, including its directors, officers, and employees of any non-compliance with any provision marked as in part B of this policy document. So if you refer to clause 10.5.1, reporting institution shall provide a timely reporting of the risk assessment, money laundering, terrorist financing risk profile, and effectiveness of the risk control and mitigation measures to the board and the senior management. And the report referred to the under paragraph 10.5.1 may include the following, which is the results of AML CFT monitoring activities carried out by the reporting institution, such as the level of the reporting institution exposure towards the MLTF risk, breakdown of the MLTF risk exposure based on the key activities or the customer segments, trend of the suspicious transaction reports, and also cash threshold reports, trends of orders received from law enforcement agencies. Can you go to the next slide, please, Jenna? So basically, in order to prevent financial crime, okay, what we will do, no, can you go to the previous slide? Yes, correct. Thank you, Jenna. So basically, when we are conducting transaction monitoring, how does it go through is that we will be able to do real-time monitoring. We will be able to do daily monitoring of the transaction, monthly monitoring, quarterly monitoring, and half-yearly monitoring, and also yearly monitoring. Because basically, based on the suspicious activity monitoring rules that you have set forth into your system that you have made available in your organizations, you will be able to put up all these SAM rules in accordance to the timeline that you have been inputted into the system. Because basically some of the transactions, you won't be able to capture the suspicious activity within the stipulated timeline. I'll walk you through in my case study that I've discovered before. So after we have done all this monitoring, we'll do the analyzation. And okay, from the analyzation stage, we'll be able to analyze the customer based on their risk level. Okay, either the high, medium, or low risk customer. Then we will be able to adjust to the monitoring of this customer transaction based on their risk level. And from the analyzation that we have been conducting, we'll be able to predict the customer's future activities as well. So by having the pattern of their transaction within stipulated timeline, we will be able to see what are their possible or future transaction activities. And in the event, if there's any suspicious activity that we will be able to further inquire to the customer, we will be able to do the alerts to the customer, we will be able to send the inquiries, and also we'll be able to call the customers, okay? And from the analyzation stage as well, we will be able to spot any financial crime activities, and subsequently, the responsibility of the compliance officer will be lodging the suspicious transaction reporting to the Financial Intelligence Enforcement Department of Bank Negara. And subsequently of all this analyzation and processes that we have in place, we will be able to prevent financial crime, and at the same time, we'll be able to increase the regulators' confidence level towards the financial institution. Next slide, please, Diana. Okay, I'm going to walk you through the cases, some of the cases that I have been seeing within my 12 years of experience being a compliance officer in various financial institutions. The first case study will be under the remittance service provider, which is on the terrorism financing case and also human trafficking case. And the second case study will be under the e-money provider, which is the money laundering case. Next slide, please, Jenna. Okay. So the case study number 1, okay. This detection on the transaction of an individual customer who's been working as a foreign worker in Malaysia. So we didn't manage to capture the transaction based on our monitoring of daily, monthly, or even quarterly or half-yearly monitoring, because the threshold limit that he had been sending the money is very little. It's amount between 1,000 ringgit to 5,000 ringgit per transfer. So the detection of the system are unable to detect this suspicious activity in the stipulated timeline. But when we have set forth the rules for the yearly monitoring to take place in the system, we managed to capture this pattern of transfer. So it relates to this terrorism financing typology, where we discovered this single customer transferring money in a small threshold limit to 56 receivers in 15 countries throughout the world. and no reasonable judgment to establish the relationship between the sender and the 56 receivers. And within a year, this customer transferred a total amount of 392,000 ringgit Malaysia. And as you know, as a foreign worker, which will be earning around 4,000 to 4,500 a month, this is it is a very triggering alarm to us. So action taken was that the customer's account was terminated and the SCR had been lodged to FIED Bank Negara. Okay, second case is much more interesting, which we have discovered before, which I've discovered before in my previous employment. Okay, we captured this transaction that detects on the human trafficking activities, specifically being held in Bukit Bintang, KL. Yeah? So when we did our monitoring on monthly transaction monitoring program and also quarterly transaction monitoring program, so this case related to human trafficking. So from the transaction monitoring made on monthly and quarterly basis, we discovered a man who we label him as an agent. Okay, he had been frequently transferring money to specifically to these three countries, which is Vietnam, Indonesia, and also Thailand. So he had also brought passport copies of various girls to substantiate the supporting documents to enable the transfer to be made to the receivers. Okay, so within the 3 months of the quarterly transaction monitoring program that we conducted, so this single agent transferred money close to 3 million ringgit to many receivers in 3 countries. So the case investigated and discovered that the agent had brought in 20 girls from these 3 countries to work under him as a GRO, guest relation officers, prostitutes, and also some of them are becoming actors in pornography videos, specifically in Bukit Bintang. So the action taken that I prepared a detailed report on this discovery, and I had conducted an internal meeting for the business unit to suspend the agent's account from transferring money, and externally, this report had been lodged to FIED. We had a specific conversation and discussion with FIED with this case, and subsequently they have taken this case to a further action and deal with Polis Diraja Malaysia. So this is quite an interesting journey that I had before in my previous appointment under the money services business sector. So next slide, please, Jana. Okay, this is the case study under the e-money provider. So what happened is that actually that the customer structuring transactions by receiving fund from multiple person-to-person transfer. Within a month, he had been receiving 808 transactions, receiving deposits money to his account. Okay, so Mr. A, 2 flags under SAM rules captured by the system. So what do we actually monitor from the SAM rules captured by the system, ladies and gentlemen? Next slide, please, Anna. So the capture was actually under the first SAM rules was that multiple reload by the third party, followed by the customer itself immediately transferring the money to another wallet. And the capturing on the second rule, the second rule was that the count of the personal-to-personal transaction to the same receiver from various senders. Can you go to the next slide, please, Jenna? So basically, this particular customer, he has been receiving 808 deposits money within a month period to his e-wallet. That amounts come to a figure of 11,000. So we are unable to determine the relationship between the personal to personal transfer. So possibly it's a gibberish account being used to move the fund and also structuring the transaction, money laundering activities. Okay, second slide, please, Jenna. Next. So in terms of his cash out, these are the suspicious activities that we have been captured. So eventually, after he had been receiving the money from within a month period from 808 transaction counts, he immediately transferred out the fund to a figure of 9,980. So altogether, he had been transferring out the money to 20 different people. So there's no specific reason and there's no reasonable judgment for us to identify why actually this transaction takes place. So possible action that we had been taken on this case is actually, next slide please, Anna. Okay, Various actions will be taken to elevate the risk level, and we will need to continuously monitor this transaction to lodge STR as multiple alert triggers for monthly, quarterly, or yearly transaction monitoring program, to suspend the account, and also to de-risk the account, to terminate the account. Okay, the key takeaways from transaction monitoring program and also financial crime prevention. The last slide will be, yes, please, Jenna. Okay. Compliance program is actually everybody's responsibility in the financial institution. It is not only the compliance department responsibility. And transaction monitoring is one of the vital measures to prevent financial crime. Number 3, awareness to all the employees is need to be given to create compliance culture in the financial institution. And money laundering and terrorism financing cases and also fraud cases are increasing day by day. So the technological shift in financial infrastructures and the rise of online payment has increased the risk of multiple fold. Fraudsters exploits every loophole in the AML compliance of banks and businesses. And number 5, last but not least, non-compliance results in losses such as penalties and monetary losses due to the serving money launderers, and the fines of non-compliance is high, including but not limited to a monetary fine, loss of credit rating, temporary or permanent closure of the business, or even revoking the business licensing by Bank Negara Malaysia. Okay, I think that's all from my end. I would like to hand over the presentation back to Jenna. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And last but not least, we have Frederic. So if everyone see the sequence, we have the compliance side, financial crime and all that, and how do we pair that to national digital identity? So Frederic, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jenna. Hi, good evening, everyone, to all the attendees and my fellow panelists. I'm Frederic Ho, the Vice President for Jumio in the APAC region. I just want to take a quick moment to link up the conversation today, and then move on forward, to the discussion sessions. Right. So Jumio, we are a EKYC service organization. We have been in business for 10 years, and we have been enabling businesses to bring their business online. And when you have to verify the identity of an individual, we perform this service around the world. So in volume terms, we have exceeded over 250 million of online identities verified. Our service is a global service where we support verification of identity documents from over 200 countries, comprising of 3,500 different identity document types. We have a service offering combining AI and human expertise, delivering a very high accuracy rates of 99.95%. And using this model, we have won awards. Today, we have already seen a lot of regulators across the region defining EKYC, digital identities in other sense, in support of moving businesses online. And of course, in Malaysia, Bank Negara's EKYC guideline has already stirred a lot of interest, within the community. We bring a service of identity verification into a existing customer application, whether is it a web application or a mobile application. You should have to change minimal to your existing infrastructure, where the incorporation of a KYC capability shouldn't be that you have to do a whole big implementation, but that it will be tightly embedded into your apps, into your web application, and where identity verification of your users can be performed. You may not be unfamiliar with how EKYC approach is actually being delivered today, where primarily we use a government issued ID, combine this with facial biometrics and liveness detection technologies to ensure that the person behind the device, whether is it a mobile phone, a PC web camera, when they submit all this information to you, that this information can be trusted. We know that it was a live person behind it. We looked at the identity document that was captured on a camera phone or webcam. We checked it for manipulation to ensure that the person submitting this, you can trust that they are who they declare themselves to be. in the rollout of digital businesses across the region, from Hong Kong to Singapore to Malaysia, we have learned a lot of best practices in course of dealing with regulators' expectations. They set very stringent requirements that minimize the risk, right, of anti-money laundering threats, but at the same time, to provide all this in a way that you have the best user experience, so that in this very highly competitive market space of financial services provided on apps, you want to come up tops. So a whole big discussion currently is ongoing in terms of achieving the balance, the nirvana. How do you meet regulator expectations without bearing exceedingly high burdens of cost and operations, right? But yet have the kind of a user experience that would put you into the best of breed within your industry itself. So this is where Jumio have encompassed the entire flow, right, and delivered the accuracy rates, the user experience that define a lot of today's news about fintechs and virtual banks successfully launching their projects in the market today. So hopefully in the discussion session, I could share a little bit more information on that. So ultimately, we are going and taking our business online because we want measurable success. And that measurable success, of course, could mean different things, achieving the customer acquisitions that you targeted, or reaching out, or achieving certain objectives, for example, financial inclusion, right, in your country. So these are real areas that will have positive impact in terms of your business delivery. So thank you, and I look forward to speak with you more on the questions that we may have on this discussion.
Thank you, Frederic. And let's pass the ball to Andanta. Andanta is from Refinitiv, and she will actually be the moderator. Thanks, Andanta.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm obviously conscious of time, but I just want to thank everyone here for joining us today on our talk. As you already know, we have a very interesting mix of speakers today. So as I go through the panel of questions with the panelists, don't forget to submit any of your questions. Yes, I already see some of them. Let's just go through the panel very quickly, and then we'll hopefully be able to answer all of it. Okay, my name is Andanta. I am your moderator for the day. I'm also the risk specialist for Refinitiv covering ASEAN, and we're going to start the panel with Frederic. All right, so Frederic, with recent development of digital banks across APAC, there is a race for digital identity for all businesses in 2021. What are the key challenges you see across all industries, and how do you plan to support that?
Hi, Andanta. Interesting question. I think that maybe I'll take a step back to first look at this exciting times that a lot of businesses are taking, going to the digital channel to expand their customer acquisitions. And when you do that, you want to be sure that the user that you're signing on, that you will never see face-to-face, will truly be who they say they are, right? And so here sets the difference between a common norm that we talk about, EKYC, and then of course there is the option about a digital identity. So if I take a step back to look at what is digital identity, right? EKYC, we are quite familiar. We have seen like Bank Negara's guidelines spelling out what has got to be complied with if you wish to onboard a customer on a non-face-to-face basis. A digital identity is the alternative form where it is just a identification that can be used to obtain digital services or carry out online transactions in a secured manner, basically proving who you say you are. And for the benefits really about expanding customer acquisition, moving from branch into digital channels, the convenience for the users to enroll into a service. And very real for us today, of course, in the COVID environment, when citizen movement restrictions are in place, how would businesses continue to perform, and go on a customer acquisition, right? So we look at how the concept of digital identity are very actively pursued by governments, in Asia, across the world. And there are good reasons in terms of having a government structured digital identity system in improving the end-to-end delivery of public services, right? Where you can imagine logging on to a government website and it's just like logging into your bank account, right? Where you, with a unique digital identity, it would have simplified a lot of the processes behind this. Not to mention that, of course, this is a big ambition, given that in developing countries, more than 1 billion people around the world today have no formal way of proving their identity. So if we are talking about having digital identity for citizens, we could look at dramatic leaps in terms of the service quality and the massive efficiency gains for government in terms of financial inclusion, providing citizens even to things like healthcare, right? So digital identity is not an easy concept, right? And of course, it has got many components that needs to work together to really make it effective. And in Malaysia, for example, Malaysian Communication and Multimedia Commission, MCMC, even this year began engagements to collect feedback, right, from the industry, from users, on the National Digital Identity (NDI) initiative in Malaysia itself, very similar to regulators and governments across the Asia and around the world. So where the challenges could be, like in a digital identity environment, I mean, the number one would be trust, right? Would you trust your government to build an identity management system that connects all the dots on your personal data, including your tax filing, your driver's license, your health records, and your bank account, right? So this is going to be a difficult question about data ownership, data privacy, as well as data sharing, right? So that there's a consensus this to be built, right, such that this platform can be effective. So we talk about citizen buy-in, right, for this to be effective. There are different projects, of course, and histories that we have learned across the world, where, for example, in France, there is a France Connect service. And there are, of course, complaints that until today, only 1 in 5 French persons actually have subscribed to that service. And similarly, in the UK, there are projects, which is gov.uk verify, has got a little bit less of statistics, about 1 in 10 that actually have subscribed to that service itself. So digital identity as a platform really begs the need to have support, right, that the community, the public itself will use it. So just circling back into the conversation today, that the challenges are discussed. Then for businesses today, in terms of choosing between EKYC and digital identity, which come first and what do I do for now if I really are planning for current business and future strategies around customer onboarding? I would like to cite a very recent Gartner finding. And they mentioned that in their report that by 2022, 80% of organizations will be using a document-centric identity proofing. In this case, it would be my card, my Tantera, right, as part of their onboarding workflows, which is increase from approximately just 30% today, right? And by 2022, more than 95% of the RFPs for document-centric identity proofing will contain clear requirements for minimizing demographic bias and as well as increase from the fewer than 15% today, right? Many companies that want to take their business online will have got to think about providing the entire skill sets, capability, knowledge, infrastructure, technology, thinking about like online identity fraud expertise, workflow and design, people who knows about ID manipulation, technical knowledge about AI and configuration. And this is where I think the last part of Gartner's recommendation reports cites that by 2023, 75% of the organization will be using a single vendor with a strong identity orchestration capabilities, because it's just going to get so complex, right? And that if you want to take a business online, you don't want to be burdened with such effects. So I'd like to share this point as a parting thought that to the question, EKYC, digital identities are really different platforms today for many businesses to structure, strategize how they will take their businesses in the digital space online safely, securely, and of course, meeting user experience requirements.
Thanks, Frederic. Okay, wait. Is the audio okay? Can you hear me?
Yes.
All good? Okay, all right. So I fixed it. I'm so sorry, guys. I don't know what happened before, but Frederic, thanks for explaining that. I guess maybe for this next question, I'd like to have you and Karyn discuss a little bit about, well, from your point, I guess, support from government, as we've already discussed, and what I assume is, again, extremely crucial in getting quality data and processing things correctly. You know, what would be your main ask in terms of dealing or supporting government and regulators? And Karyn, maybe from your side or from a government or regulatory body, what is the best use case you've seen around data integrity and innovation that you think can be replicated or implemented?
Yes, thank you. In terms of, I would have to say what's happening right now that I think is not only transformative, but incredibly helpful is the whole issue of fintech, encompassing that world that is now obviously innovating and disrupting the financial sector to traditional legacy banks as we know it, but also has great potential for the government in terms of assisting us in our fight against money laundering and terrorism. When we look at the fintech ecosystem, obviously there's many players. You have cryptocurrency, you have AI, you have different tools. But for us right now, what I've been concentrating on specifically, I would very much welcome the attendees as well to join us on this, is I have launched with the assistant of Robin Lee, who's obviously one of our co-panelists as our private sector liaison, the Department of Justice OPDAT, which is a section within the Department of Justice, the U.S. Department of Justice OPDAT's FinTech Public-Private Partnership Dialogue. And what we are trying to do is very simple. We are putting at the table the U.S. government, other government officials with federal, central bankers, and more importantly, the startups and the fintech startups and the CEOs. And what we're trying to do is learn from each other. So we're not there looking at cases. We are not there in a law enforcement capacity. We are there to break down the silos, to learn to work with each other so that it doesn't become a case, 5-10 years down the road where there is some AML violation or sanctions. We want to talk before then. So I think in terms of, instead of speaking directly about a product or a tool, I would look at more something such as platforms such as that I launched on behalf of the Department of Justice in January. And every quarter we have a different speaker come and they sit down, they tell us what they're doing, who they are, what questions they have. And we, when I say we, U.S. government officials, we're learning about the struggles and the challenges that they're facing. And then what they learn from us is what the expectations are. So that has been something that's been incredibly helpful, incredibly useful. And I thank you and all of you for the opportunity to tell you a little bit about that program. And also to Robin Lee, who is our, as everyone knows, an incredible connector between public-private and across the globe. So thank you.
Wow,
Frederic,
you,
maybe anything on your end before I move on to Karyn? Maybe an ask for, in terms of collaboration with government or regulators?
I think that on the topic of digital identities, this would be a good time, of course, to provide that feedback in terms of what your expectations or your views about where this can be can bring greater efficiencies, productivities to the whole digital economy as a whole. I think that some areas that we could contribute some ideas would be around the concept about different levels of identity profiles. I think that as a entity that has a repository of citizen identities that can be now served for online services, as an end user, I could have different profiles which it would be different if I'm applying, for example, for a scholarship versus if I am, applying for an online competition, right? Where how much did I choose to review, right? I think that maybe I should have a say, right, in that to determine that. And I think that it's also important to maintain the level of choice, right, to the consumer. You have EKYC, and that's pretty much flexible, right? Because it's an ID document and you're using a facial biometrics. And then there's digital identity, which is a government system. I think that where we have learned lessons is when organizations offer that choice, it actually made a big difference to their user conversion, right? Now,
Right.
yeah, so that really is about design as well. A final point, of course, is that digital identity systems are coming up, of course, in Malaysia, in Hong Kong, in Singapore. At some point, like, we are also talking about a regional business that we can enter into these markets. So an interoperable system, like, would be very, very effective, right? Because at this current stage where digital identity systems are set, right, it would be laborious for businesses to connect in every country to the local system so that they can actually, provide that identity verification service.
Right.
I think that the one is a bit far down the road, and that's where the EKYC approach to regional business, global business, right, is currently a far more efficient, approach to having an online business really reach out to the markets.
Right. Thank you for sharing that, Frederic. And I think, Karyn, I guess from both of your ends, you do realize, or both of you have kind of had the same conclusion where there is a lot of potential for public-private partnerships to happen, and especially for learning possibilities in terms of the private sector and also the government. And I think there's a lot of potential, and especially with this new experience in terms of digital banking, being new for everyone, it's kind of new in terms of the experience itself, how to regulate, maybe tackle any situations that might arise. So Karyn, sorry, we hear that in some parts of the world there are certain litigations going on. Would you be able to share some of those use cases, and then maybe any takeaways from those cases that can be implemented or kept an eye out here? As well, maybe towards the end, you can just give a little bit more of an explanation to everyone in terms of the partnership you and Robin made in terms of the public-private partnership with FinTech.
Yes, thank you. In terms of some of the litigation, again, looking at the FinTech world, as it were, there's so many new products. The technology is a tsunami right now, which is wonderful, right? But with change, there becomes some turmoil and tension. How are we going to handle this? And looking at it from the government side and the private sector side, these new tools and products are transforming all of our lives. And just as it helps people such as you and everyone else on the panel today, makes our lives easier, we also have bad actors out there that are looking to exploit. They're always looking to exploit something that is good for a kind of criminal purpose. And aside from that, which we always have to keep a dialogue open between the public and the private, because the private sector moves quicker. It just moves quicker. Any government is not as rapid turning than that.
Right.
So that's why we need that bridge between the two. But in terms of litigation, right now what we're dealing with, specifically in the United States, is that we're looking at a number of issues, but let me zero it down to one, is the issue of bank charters. Bank charters in terms of neobanks. And I'm sure that your audience is well educated on the terms, but obviously neobank is a purely digital platform bank. How are we going to charter that? And not only that, but who is going to charter that? And the United States has a multi-layer approach to regulatory issues. So is it federal charters, is it state charters, et cetera? And right now, a case that is being litigated right now in the Southern District of New York, which is New York City, is a case involving the New York State Department of Financial Services and our OCC, which stands for the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. The OCC is federal, New York State Department of Financial Services obviously is state, and right now it's ongoing in court as we speak regarding special purposes national bank charters. So for a FinTech bank, who is going to issue that charter? So we're actually seeing it right now. And that decision is incredibly complex. It's going to shape our entire future. And really what's interesting is that we are so far into the future, and yet these issues that I'm speaking about, we're harkening back to older legislation. For example, it's a National Bank Act of 1864 in the United States that plays a part in this litigation as well. So it's just very interesting, the kind of, you know, intermingling of the two. So that's something we can all watch and see how that plays out. And it's a new frontier. In terms of the second question you had asked, in terms of the public-private partnership, literally it came about with the support of OPDAT, a section with the Department of Justice, a fantastic section that reaches out to our partners overseas. But it really came about that if there was no information between the public and the private sector on something as innovative as fintech, then everyone loses. And what I wanted to do, with the assistance of Robin and others with the Department of Justice, of course, is to just create a platform where it was a safe space. It's just to communicate, just to talk to each other. And we meet, as I said, every quarter. Literally, last time we had a CEO from Singapore, a fantastic young man, who literally sat there and he said, you know what, I just wanted to start my company. I didn't know anything about AML, CTF, simply because it wasn't my focus. And we understand that. But this gave us an opportunity to talk to him and then say, we understand it's not a money-making part of the business, but it can be a money loss part of the business if it's not attended to properly. So again, it's thank you for the opportunity to share that. And I don't know if Robin has anything he wants to add from the private sector, but this is what we're looking at. And then just very finally, some of the other really interesting cases I think that are happening right now. There's actually a wonderful BBC produced podcast. It's called The Missing Crypto Queen. And it deals with, yeah, it's fantastic. I highly recommend listening to it. And it deals with a scam involving cryptocurrency. And what's interesting is that 2 individuals have already been indicted in the Southern District of New York, again, New York City, obviously at the center, because there's so much money that goes through New York City in our banking sector. Not only was one of the main players indicted, but also what we call a gatekeeper. The attorney for the scam was indicted and pled guilty. And the reason I bring it up is that there's still one named conspirator who hasn't been apprehended. But what's interesting about it was it dealt with cryptocurrency, dealt with a cryptocurrency called OneCoin. And what was very interesting about it was that most of the people, that was a multi-level marketing type of scheme, and most of the people who invested, I mean, at one point there was over 3 billion euro invested by people around the world in this. And what really hurt was that they didn't understand how blockchain worked. Most of the investors were good, decent people who didn't understand that if the transactions were not being recorded on the block ledger, then it didn't exist. And in this case, the core of it all was that OneCoin was not on the blockchain. So that means whoever was controlling their account could change the value easily. And it was also very interesting because anybody who attacked OneCoin was called a hater, and then people went after them. So it's a fascinating podcast for your readers. It's not as I said, they're pled guilty in the Southern District of New York and New York City federally. But again, it's just a fascinating example between fintech, cryptocurrency, AML, compliance, everything that's happening right now. I will end by saying all the tools, all the products, I do hope will help us all in the sense of keeping us financially safe, physically safe, and allow our economies to continue to be, uninterrupted by bad actors. So overall, I'm very optimistic. Thank you.
Thanks, Karyn. I appreciate that. I am going to listen to the podcast, by the way. I do need some new podcast suggestions, so I'm going to definitely listen on that. So, okay, Robin, from your end, I know you've already given sort of an explanation in terms of transaction monitoring, but a lot of the people that are probably dialing in don't really know, or maybe like terms of transactions in terms of businesses, right? Not quite sure how it works. So what kind of data is processed, what kind of technology is behind it? Will you just give us a little bit of an intro very quickly, and then I'm gonna shoot to the next question with you and your Fazlim.
Sure.
You're on mute.
Yeah. I just took myself off. Sorry. So, thanks, and thank you for the question, Andanta. So look, I think when it comes to like data sets in any financial institution, arguably transactions are the largest data set in any institution. And so being able to sift through all of that and figure out, find that needle in the haystack, that one transaction or those few transactions that could hold some sort of a risk is really, really challenging. And as I said in my slide, post 9/11, when we're looking at terrorist financing, this is even more difficult, right? And again, that example I cited with the bomb maker, I think really highlights that. So I think, I gave a definition of what transaction monitoring is. Where I think, the puck is heading, I can expand on that a little bit more, is such that what I was saying earlier about transactions being the biggest data set, well, that's where AI comes in, right? So for those of you who aren't aware, AI has been around for like 50 years. It's been a variations of different technologies that have emerged over time, and we've had two what are called AI winters, where the technologies have peaked, funding has run out, everything's not working, and then that respective technology will crash. So we had one in I think the early to mid 70s, and another one in the early 80s. So AI isn't new, but the latest technique that has emerged is what's called machine learning, and a subset of that called deep learning. So machine learning is where humans are training the algorithm to get smarter. Deep learning is you leave the algorithm to do it by itself. So AI 101 here, guys, for those of you who aren't aware. Okay, well, machine learning and deep learning are based off data. And the bigger a data set that you have, the smarter the algorithm becomes. And who's got the biggest data set in the financial institution? Transactions, right? So I think, so if I don't know if this makes sense to everyone, and please do ask me questions if it doesn't. But to me, this speaks highly to the potential of AI specifically in transaction monitoring with those examples that I cited earlier. The other thing that I think is important is we now talk about the software or the platform itself that you're using for transaction monitoring. Okay. Now, one thing that we've made sure that we do here at Napier is to architect our software for the cloud, because the way the world is heading, and if you look at what regulators are doing around the world, they're becoming more and more cloud friendly. The cloud providers themselves, your Amazon Web Services, your Googles, your whoever, are now becoming smarter, where they'll have, for example, there's a rule there could be a rule in jurisdiction A where the data can't leave jurisdiction A, and the cloud service providers account for that, where they have your data and your software will only sit on servers within jurisdiction A. So being architected for cloud is a real advantage, because then you can scale out quicker. We have big data architecture as well. Whereas what we see in the market is several old school solutions saying they're cloud ready, but they're just taking that old deployed software that's not architected for cloud and sticking it in the cloud. And it's like using dial-up, right? There's a lot of latency. Your connections aren't going to be that great. You're going to have problems with that. So I think being architected for cloud it's really important, your platform. And then the last part that I want to stress on this is the ability for the platform to integrate with other applications within your organization. So if you're a bank, you've got to be able to integrate with your core banking system, or your CRM if you're a CRM for your customer list, or a supply chain, partner vendor system, and so what we've done at Napier is we utilize what's called Apache NiFi, a technique which can integrate any existing methodology today. So whether it's a flat file, whether it's an API, doesn't matter to us. We're able to integrate with all the systems that are out there now. Exactly, flexibility. So I could have said all that in one word, so my apologies. I went on a bit there.
It's okay, that's why I'm here. Okay, so a couple of, there's actually someone that came in and said it's not just the blockchain space. You know, HSBC was just implicated this week in facilitating the transfers of money in a Ponzi scheme. So I guess if we can take it now in a perspective of a client or a business. So Nur Fazli, you know, how important is the quality of data and technology in combating day-to-day financial crime? I know you've shared a bit of use cases previously on your slides. Anything that maybe you can keep in mind or tell, or maybe a new case that you can share with everyone else that, you know, people can keep in mind?
Well, basically, the data, the quality of the data is very important, so that we will be able to identify the cases and also raise the suspicion accordingly. So in order to address your question, Andanta, we would need to have the data to be of a quality level. Then only we will be able to identify these cases. If the quality of the data is doubtful, then how are we going to take the next step moving forward in order to address all these cases? So the quality of the data will come from the perspective of that the data need to be verified. The data need to be crystal clear that is actually coming from a true source. And also, you need to have an independent source also to do the verification methodology to ensure the data is actually of a quality piece. Then after all these processes that been captured and accordingly, then we will be able to keep the data and also to do the analyzations of the transaction and subsequently take the necessary actions.
So, you know, Fazli, as I still have you here, you know, this is the era of digital banking coming out in terms of next year and across ASEAN. I know maybe you've shared it already, but are there any plans for Boost to go to digital banking? And if you are, have you internally processed anything for this digital bank in terms of, you know, like applying for it or, you know, implementing this digital bank? Are you internally facing any challenges? And if I can have Robin sort of share his experience after Nur Fazli in terms of helping other digital banks as well, you know, what can you share with Nur Fazli or anyone else here on how to tackle those challenges?
Thank you for the question. For application for digital bank licensing with Bank Negara, I think how the mechanism on that yet.
Thank you for sharing that, Nur Fazli. Robin, add in terms of, you know, maybe give some ideas to Nur Fazli when she is, you know, moving forward with the digital bank, you know?
So I've come across multiple, like, obviously none of these are digital banks yet, especially in, well, in Singapore and Malaysia specifically.
Correct.
But I've come across like a number of digital banks who how should I put it, end up buying the regular stuff that regular banks have because they're branded, if that makes sense. And it's, you know, why would you buy a 40-year-old core banking system technology piece, or a you know, a 30-year-old, you know, I don't know, like screening tool or and stuff like that, right? Or even on the transaction monitoring side, right? I've seen some guys like look at like the 35, 40-year-old guys who've been in the market. It's like, what's your edge, man? Like why would you do that? And this is me, the Silicon Valley geek in me coming out here, right? Like you know, it makes very little sense to me just because they're a brand and they have a name, right? So that's number one. And I guess the other approach that I find really, really interesting is I've seen guys in the market who think they can build it all themselves. Okay, and they'll be situated in
Right.
a part of the world where there isn't that much coding talent. So that really leads me to question: Are they doing the Frankenstein thing, right? Are they getting just free bits of open source code and then stitching it together and offering that as a product, right? I mean, it, and even on Refinitiv's side, right? They'll be sending what's it called, like web crawlers to pull the information from the web and think that they can do just as good a job as Refinitiv. Right, and I know just from my time there that WorldCheck has 700 people around the world, analysts around the world who are there updating the software. They're doing a diligent job. They're all trained. Blah 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 blah. And do you think you can come in and become a bank by just using a web crawler? I just find it really, really bizarre that some of these approaches that guys are taking. My 2 cents. And again, this is just me coming from the. I used to work in Silicon Valley. I was coder. I was building products. You know what I mean? Like.
No, totally. Yeah, and I think also especially when you go to digital banking, I think from our conversation as well, in terms of all the panelists, I think you guys can all look that compliance, if anything, has to be even more diligent and needs to be looked at even more. And so you can't just be getting data left and right. You have to make sure that the data and the technology you're getting is quality, just to make sure that you're actually complying with regulations correctly. We just don't want this situation to continue, right? Okay, so I'm aware of time. I have one last question. I know I'm going to wrap it up, but I think there are a couple of questions that I'd like to ask now, if you guys don't mind. Just 2 questions before I end it. So I'll give one to Frederic and one to Robin. Frederic, this is, I think, an interesting question. So how accurate is the biometric facial recognition on identical twins or triplets?
I think there's always a lot of technical comparisons to twins. I think that in general, biometrics-based technologies only have a moderate level of success in terms of really separating a twin. But I think that maybe to look back into the business context, like when you actually launch a digital service, how many incidents of twins are applying for your applications are you planning to see, right? Now, I think that where EKYC really delivers online business gains, we look at the benefits and risks, right? And you have to manage your risks. And that's why you use technology, you use AI, not that you can actually stamp out every single thing. Right, but where what you believe that is being managed, right? You then have the option then really to deal with the good guys, right? That really need your service and you can deliver the value. But from a response, I think the facial comparisons of twins, these are common issues. There are a lot of documents in the internet that talks about them. But as an EKYC business, I'll say that most of the systems in production today, they acknowledge that this is a problem. But then again, of course, there's always the business gains of delivering to the broader community.
Right.
Yeah. And I think I would like to add a little bit additional points on your question on the digital bank. So basically the objective of the regulators in Malaysia to introduce digital bank in Malaysia is basically to help to serve the underserved. So basically, if we go to that context and comparing to the conventional bank in Malaysia, the conventional bank is actually focusing on the customers who really have the leverage of funds and activities, and who will be able, basically those who have money, then the conventional bank will definitely serve them. But the whole idea of digital bank approach being guided by the regulators in Malaysia actually to help and serve the underserved. So for example, if you have small merchants, if you have individuals who is staying in island, whereby it's very difficult for them to get access to
Inaccessible.
conventional banks. So
Right.
these are the areas and avenues whereby we will need to have a digital bank to be serving all these underserved. So hopefully the idea and the intention of having the digital
AI will be learning all the time. Can the AI be too clever and it could miss out a potential suspicious transaction? Again, referring with the Movida bombing, it only took $426.
So this is where I think, look, ultimately, at the end of the day, we are up against humans, right? And the human mind is going to be, as humans, we're our own worst enemies, right? So we're always going to find a way around things. There will always be, evil in the world, if you want to call it that. So people will always figure out a way around whatever the process or the technology is. That being said, I do think that what I mentioned earlier about that element of building a customer profile, kind of like Facebook, right? Where I have Andanta, I have her transactional behavior. And so anything that's out of the ordinary that happens with her behavior can then get flagged and brought to the attention, right? So instead of selling digital marketing, it's just making sure that those outliers get identified and brought to the attention of the analyst.
Absolutely. So I hope that answered your question.
I can add that there are like newer RegTech solutions, data sets, all that stuff coming out all the time. So it's and some of this stuff has been pretty interesting, to say the least. So
right.
I could go on about that, but more than happy to take that conversation offline, and we can explore that further. Thank you.
Sounds good. All right. So my last question for the panel, Frederic, Robin, what new technologies do you have planned, and what should we keep a lookout for?
I think that where Jumio plays a role is really to prevent the bad actor from even gaining access to the system. So that is the first time that the user comes on, presents himself, and then this is where we have got to be very good at ensuring that we catch the bad people and then not give them an account, because once they're in there, then they will do wonderful stuff that will keep Robin busy, right? Now, where we really got to look at data using AI, machine learning, is to identify where the next threat vectors are. We need to know what the syndicates are doing. What are the common practices that we see around the world? Because where Jumio's service works is that we are a global parameter for our clients. So for any new trends and patterns that we have seen, we have to build this into our own algorithm and to be able to then filter these out. So we got to move as fast as where the next trend and next practice is going to be. So I say AI, right, machine learning, to identify the next threats that will come to the system itself.
Sure. On my end, Andanta, I mean, one thing I can share is that we are seriously exploring link analysis. Okay.
Wow.
However, the challenge that I see, I mean, I tried building this in a previous company, and then I've seen the current products that are out today. So for those of you who aren't aware, link analysis is basically like that spider web where you can see one person is related to the other person that's related to the other person, and they're called hops, right? As you move along the different parts of that chain. And the challenge that I've seen with current products is that you just suddenly get this map of relationships, and then you're expected to figure it out yourself as to which areas are risky, which areas are not risky. And I think unless you have like a law enforcement background, because people who work in law enforcement are very used to using a similar product called I2, where they can figure out this relationship is hop 3 is the one that you got to look at, or or person X over there. So what we're trying. So what I've said to the team at Napier is, if we're going to do this, we have to make it so that my mom can use it. Okay, that someone who has zero
intuitive.
Yeah, exactly. That they get prompts or something like that. So we've deliberately held off from releasing anything while we just discuss the user experience side of that, and then when we're ready, we'll roll that out. So yeah.
Exciting times. Okay, so panelists, I do appreciate all your time. Nur Fazlim, good luck on the digital identity portion, digital banking portion if you do proceed forward. Frederic and Robin, we're looking out for you guys, especially for new technologies. And of course, we wish. I'm just going to give 4 words, and I just hope the panelists can just
part, like, you know, that the data has been obtained, you know, in an appropriate manner, and that it's accurate in an appropriate manner as well.
agree. Okay, public-private partnership and collaboration. How do you feel about it, and what would you like to see change? Karyn?
Thank you. Obviously, I think it's an excellent way to move forward. We're human beings. We need to talk to each other. And instead of having this siloed, at times adversarial interconnection, I think we need to have something, as I said, in a safe space to have that. So what do I think about it? I personally find it to be educational, informative, exciting, and interesting. And I'm also just very thankful to have the private sector, I should say, also want a place at the table. So I think it's a positive thing. Thank you.
Okay, good. Third one is, I think Frederic would, I don't know if Frederic would like to answer, but technology platform. How do you feel about it, and what would you like to see change?
2 words, AI and cloud. So I think that to deliver efficiencies, right, and to deal with identity fraud, you got to have consolidation of feeds, which is data, right? Cloud would be the best approach, and apply, you know, technical capabilities to understand, and then of course implement these into your customer onboarding practices. Those are key to me.
I think also more and more companies are moving in that direction as well, and so it's quite interesting to see where it would lead us actually. So absolutely. Yeah. And Nur Fazlim, I guess the best for last, the future. What do you feel about it, and what would you like to see change?
I would aspire the government intention to go towards cashless society, so that moving forward we will be able indirectly to have all the audit trails of all the transaction. We will have less cash to handle, and when we have an audit trail towards all the transaction through the financial institutions, we will be able to minimize the money laundering, terrorism, and any unlawful activity. So I would really look forward for the world to move forward accordingly to the cashless society.
Me too. I do want to thank all of your time for talking with me and answering all these questions. For every participant here and for all the attendees, thank you for sitting with us. I hope you found the talk valuable. I sure had a great time. Of course, some podcast recommendations were dropped, and of course, some of the partnerships and things to look out for. If you have any further questions or slides, I think Jenna will be able to follow up on that. But I do want to thank everyone for their time and for spending it with me. I'm talking about transaction monitoring, digital transformation, and digital identity.
Thank you, Andanta.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, panelists. So, so to wrap up, thank you, Frederic from Jumio, Nur Fazlim from Axiata Digital and Boost, Robin from Napier, Karyn from US Department of Justice, and lastly, Andanta from Refinitiv. So thank you everyone for staying. So we're gonna have a group picture for all the panelists, and we will also email you some of the slides and also the recording of today's session. Can we have all the panelists up, and I'm going to stop the recording.